So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for joining us on this RXLine and Cisco Security webinar, where we will be discussing building a coordinated approach and reducing the complexity of your cybersecurity infrastructure. My name is Carl Henriksen, and I'm joined by Mark Waldmeyer, our Senior Solution Architect at RXLine, and we will be your hosts for the next 25 to 30 minutes. So before we kick off with the main webinar content, I'd just like to give you a quick introduction and background on RXLine. RXLine was established back in 2007, and we've won several awards since we got going. We're currently across several locations: London, Manchester, Australia, and Manila. And as you would expect from any capable service provider in these times, we are fully certified across ISO 27001, 9001, and Cyber Essentials. We operate on a 24/7 basis in terms of our service desk and network operations center, and we support and look after in excess of 3,500 users and in excess of 7,000 devices, which are fully managed and monitored. All our engineers are security checked, and we invest heavily in industry-leading automation and service delivery capabilities. And for the past 2 to 3 years, we've had a great run at growing our team. A few more of our certifications and awards. I've already mentioned the ISOs and Cyber Essentials, but we are a Cisco Premier Partner, and we invest quite heavily in the Cisco partner community. Along with that, we have Microsoft, we're a Gold Partner, and between Cisco and Microsoft, they make up 2/3 of our core vendor portfolio. Some of our awards and our achievements, always nice to share these kind of things in the webinars in terms of what we've done over the last 3 to 4 years. We've had some really good runnings with CRN in being MSP of the Year in terms of runner-ups. We've won a couple of security accolades, and we've also been recognized as a good employer and a great place to work by the MSP Innovation Awards in Europe. So that's just a bit of a background in terms of who we are and what we do. So let's get on to the meat of the webinar. As we all know, 2020 has really kind of changed the way we live as a population, and obviously also the way we've kind of changed in doing business. It's quite staggering to think that just under half of the global workforce is now considered to be fully mobile, and a huge proportion of businesses have more than 3 remote locations. In fact, some have 5 or 6 remote locations, far more than previously had in 2019 and 2018. Due to the pandemic, there's been a rapid rise in digital transformation, and this is continuously driving change, and with change, you get complexity. And you know, one of the biggest cyber challenges we've seen in 2020 is really that of endpoint security. And what I mean by endpoint security, it's the ability to protect the corporate network from all the computers and all the devices that are remotely connecting to it. And due to COVID and the pandemic, we've seen a huge sprawl in the number of endpoints coming onto the network. And as the endpoints increase, so does the attack vector. But one of the other interesting things that we've kind of seen as well, which is maybe non-technology related, is that really a lot of organizations out there are a lot more willing to hire talented workers wherever they live. It's no longer a necessity to be in the same town or city or country or even continent. So it really is starting to become a virtual first talent acquisition strategy. And in doing so, you absolutely have to make sure that remote working practices become a lot more matured, because they are still fairly immature in the current state, especially when it comes to security. So moving on to the security teams, and you know, it's a known fact that really the demands now being placed on cybersecurity teams within organizations and within the providers is really becoming quite strained. As I mentioned previously, along with change, you get challenge. And what we've seen is that moving to the cloud and digital transformation, those two technologies or those two practices specifically are placing a huge strain on security resources as well as traditional practices. So distributed workforces and workforces that have been disrupted as a result of the pandemic, what we're seeing is that they are not particularly security focused, and some of the security basics are being quite heavily neglected. And this again is putting huge strains and demands on security teams. The rise of cyber attacks, I mean, they're coming in thick and fast, and everywhere from fireless malware to zero-day exploits to advanced persistent threats, which are now becoming commonplace in what would be a standard cyber attack campaign. Polymorphic malware, for those of you who are familiar with that, it's a type of malware that is constantly changing its identifiable features in order to evade detection. 93% of all malware in 2019 was deemed to be polymorphic, and traditional antivirus solutions are not adequately equipped to deal with this type of threat. As traditional antivirus becomes more legacy and the confidence declines in antivirus, you get the rise of newer technologies such as EDR, which is endpoint detection and response, which is really a newer expansion of security, and which with a much greater focus on the endpoint visibility to enable faster response and remediation times. The other thing that we're seeing as well that's putting more demand on security teams is this rise of insider threats, which is quite an interesting one because what the predictions are out there is that insider threats will continue to get more frequent, and most likely as a result of potentially disgruntled employees who maybe are now without work as a result of being made redundant due to current times. So a whole combination of activity, almost the perfect storm, is happening, which unfortunately is putting this huge pressure and demand on security teams. And from a complexity point of view, a huge number of organizations are now citing complexity being the biggest challenge and their biggest concern around how to navigate their way through the cybersecurity landscape. Moving on to that topic specifically, which is very much around the current industry coming across and actually being deemed to be too complex, and arguably it actually is. So we are seeing, as a security provider, we are seeing an increasing number of security applications being installed across the spectrum. When we onboard new clients, we're coming across applications where we might not have seen them before, or we recognize who the vendor is, but a huge number of applications are being installed. And you know what? The more applications that are installed, the more noise you'll get from those applications. Around 44% of organizations, according to a recent CISO benchmark study, cited that all these applications that are implemented are generating, tens of thousands of daily alerts, but they've only got the ability to respond and deal with 50% of them. So the current paradigm is really around, what's the problem? I need a solution. But the biggest question gets overlooked, and that is really, will that currently integrate into my environment, or will it cause disharmony, which effectively leads to a huge amount of operational inefficiency and unnecessary complexities, and of course, huge time wasting. So what doesn't help, unfortunately, is that because the market is so buoyant, because the market is so big, we're seeing a huge number of vendors coming to market, designing new products, new services, but really centered around single solutions. Everyone claiming to be more secure or next gen, but they're creating solutions that don't easily integrate with one another, and they're actually only effectively addressing single threat vectors. So this leads to a whole bunch of strain, a whole bunch of complexity, which effectively means you can't measure the effectiveness, you can't draw comparisons, and you're spending an increasing amount of time in trying to report on what the cybersecurity product and landscape you actually have installed. So what is needed? So this is not just us saying this. This is what we are seeing out there as well. And most organizations and most consulting firms are coming around to the fact that a much more coordinated approach is actually needed. So first and foremost, resolving complexity, absolutely key. So security products ideally need to be implemented and should work together as a team. We all know what teams are capable of. They communicate in real time, they learn from each other, and they respond as one effective unit. Your endpoint security has got to work with your network security, which has got to work with your cloud security. And underpinning all of that sits things like multi-factor authentication to deliver your identity and your access management. So you've got to be able to join the dots in order to confidently secure your business. And you must really, as a result of that, adopt a much more integrated platform approach to cybersecurity. I just want to say a bit around NIST. Many of you will be familiar with NIST, or the NIST framework. So NIST effectively stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they established a risk management framework, which is a set of recommended operational standards and guidelines for organizations to follow to ensure the compliance of their data and systems. So these standards and guidelines are typically seen as best practices and really quite essential and quite core to delivering cybersecurity risk. And I've listed them on the screen. 5 core elements around identification, protection, detection, response, and recovery. And I think with the integrated approach to platform, what you have to ensure as an organization is that you're ticking each of those 5 boxes. And if you do, you'll be in pretty good shape and your security posture will be pretty strong kind of going forward. But it's not easily done. We do have to give it quite a lot of thought and planning in order to make sure that you're complying to the framework. But it is a fantastic framework, which we are seeing being adopted more and more. So that's just a bit of the background on the current state, some of the current challenges that we are seeing as a service provider. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to my colleague Mark, who will introduce and talk a bit more around Cisco and SecureX.
So yeah, thanks, Carl, for handing over. I just wanted to initially kind of pick up on your point just around resolving the complexity and unifying the existing sort of solutions. So essentially, Cisco have taken a similar approach. So they've recently sort of announced that they'll sort of be simplifying their naming architecture. Cisco's been in the security game for quite a number of years now, and obviously they've sort of inherited a large number of sort of disparate product names. They've taken the view to sort of replacing those down, and they've actually reduced their sort of product naming by about 50% across the board, and just brought those under one sort of branding. Moving on, just looking at the solution itself. So Cisco, obviously, being in the security game, they've released a product called Cisco SecureX. Essentially, what this does is it sort of tries to unify and join your existing infrastructure together, just providing IT teams with full visibility and automation across your existing infrastructure, as well as any new security products that you bring into your portfolio. So as we see more and more services transitioning to a cloud-based service, IT teams are losing sight of where that information is sort of existing. There's a sort of an adoption of sort of working from any location, and that leads to sort of IT companies trying to adopt a sort of SASE type architecture, so SASE, and allowing them to kind of secure the remote branches, home workers, and those sort of things as users kind of move out of the office landscape. Essentially, the next part of the conversation is really around zero trust, and that's essentially using a portfolio of existing products or potentially new products in your IT landscape to kind of provide security across the workforce, the workplace, and different workloads as well, as those move into public cloud or sort of private cloud as well. Essentially, around all of that, as Carl mentioned earlier, a very important part of that is really understanding what's going on in your environment and being able to report and do some analytics across that. So, SecureX provides a really good platform for that. It kind of brings everything together and allows you to kind of run some really good analytics across all sorts of things, such as your Cisco Umbrella, secure endpoints, and the malware side of things as well. Moving on to SecureX itself. So as a platform, SecureX is essentially a cloud-native platform. It's built sort of around the security portfolio of products. And it essentially, as I mentioned earlier, its one goal is just to provide a single pane of glass to kind of bring all your existing infrastructure together. So it essentially provides integrations across both Cisco products, but also a number of third-party solutions. That provides a single pane of glass dashboard where you can get full visibility, which is also highly customizable. So it'll sort of suit a number of organizations. It also provides a threat response platform, which is built around the Cisco Threat Response and Talos offering. And that can tie into an API aggregator that will sort of bring through a number of different intelligence and context response actions throughout the organization. And lastly, it kind of allows you a remediation point, which is just around the orchestration and automation, where sort of IT teams can sort of drag and drop essentially automation or workflows to sort of alert or take specific action based on their sort of requirements. Just looking at the SecureX dashboard itself. So obviously, as you can see, there's a lot of information on screen, but it's very customizable. So one of the main views of this is to allow users to sort of have full visibility. If you wanted to, you could have a full view of your organization, but then also allow users to customize and potentially have up to sort of 5 dashboards that might have different levels of information. And you can also resize all the tiles, move and sort of swap them around as needed. Along the left-hand side, you can see a number of integrated applications. So, a number of pre-existing integrations exist already, but essentially any sort of third-party integrations, such as an existing SIEM product, could also be integrated and show up in that dashboard as well. Lastly, they kind of also provide a sort of proactive and sort of managed threat hunting service, which on the right-hand side is all around the Talos service, and that's kind of communicated through the activity panel. So any new threats, any kind of trends that are ongoing, that's all communicated through there and sort of visible to people as they need it. Mentioning the integrations again, there are some pre-existing integrations. So, these are pre-packaged sort of pre-existing scripting and API that you can use along existing products that you might have in your portfolio. If they're not already pre-existing, there is a method of sort of doing custom integrations, just using a sort of open API. So it's very customizable, and you can kind of integrate this into most of the systems that you might already have running in your environment as well. Just talking about the unified visibility. So again, around the integration, the real sort of benefit of all of this is to just allow your team to kind of identify and investigate sort of threats across the environment, and by bringing all of that together into one dashboard. And that's just really to allow them to sort of remediate those threats going forwards, and also communicate them out to the larger business as well. So moving on, just looking at the orchestration piece. So we kind of have an example of how simple that is for IT teams to configure. There are sort of existing orchestration sets that are kind of available for you to sort of use or customize, but you can really build any sort of workflow that fits into your kind of need. This workflow that's been shown on screen is really just a workflow to show a suspicious URL that's been sent off to Cisco sort of a threat grid for analysis. And as soon as that's come back and has been marked out, there's an email and even a WebEx sort of Teams message that's been sent out to the IT team to just kind of let them know what that end result is. So that's really it around the SecureX platform. But just going into some of the components that make that up. So one of the very important sort of products that we've used for a long time at RXLine, but is very effective, is Cisco Umbrella. So Cisco Umbrella, primarily, kind of uses DNS to sort of stop threats throughout your organization. It's sort of one of the first layers of defense, sort of, when devices connect into to a malicious site or anything like that. And it really reduces the chance of malware getting onto the network. So DNS being a foundation of the internet means that it's a really good point to sort of correlate and collect information and pass that further on up into SecureX for sort of further analysis as well. Looking at another product that kind of is critical and very core to the Cisco Secure platform is really Cisco AMP or Advanced Malware Protection. So this is essentially what you'd look at as a sort of EDR replacement, and it kind of sits on your endpoints to provide that kind of zero trust type of environment. But it's worth noting as well that it doesn't just need to sit on a sort of Windows 10 or endpoint device. It actually can be sort of deployed across all devices across your organization. So that could be Cisco Firepower firewalls. It could be Cisco Umbrella, and it could even be sort of like a Meraki or Cisco Meraki type device as well. Looking at the Cisco Firepower Management Center, this is a core component that is used to sort of configure and administer sort of Cisco next generation firewalls. So it's essentially the nerve center for those type of devices. Again, it sort of lists and logs all the events and sort of compliance across those devices. And these analytics can again be passed up into Cisco SecureX. So essentially, you wouldn't need to delve into these dashboards, but you could report on very similar information at a granular level on Cisco SecureX. But just along the wider sort of Cisco security portfolio, there's a number of products that kind of fall into the security side of things. SecureX is sort of the thing that brings everything together. But as we mentioned, there's Cisco AMP, there's a Cisco Duo as well, which is quite a sort of good product in terms of multi-factor authentication. And last but not least is obviously Cisco StealthWatch, which would work on a network layer to sort of protect your network side of things. Again, working with Cisco AMP quite well. And finally, just to kind of reiterate one of the first slides was really just around why we would want sort of IT teams to kind of embrace this type of infrastructure, and it's really just around simplifying the infrastructure through integrations and dashboards. We want to make sure that there's a good level of visibility across to the internal teams. Just making sure that they've got the correct information, utilizing things like Cisco Threat Response, which can dig quite deep down into any threats that are sort of visible, and then just making sure that that's backed up by an efficient manner of sort of analyzing and reporting those threats. So just making sure that IT teams have the tools that they need to manage that sort of end to end through the whole life cycle of a detected threat on the system. So with that, I just kind of wanted to hand over back to Carl just so he could kind of conclude the presentation.
Great, thanks, Mark. So onto the final piece really, which is all around kind of why Cisco. So kind of first and foremost, I think Cisco are arguably the largest kind of leader in cybersecurity, named by Gartner, and they've held that position for a number of years. But for those of you who are not familiar with Talos, and apologies if I'm preaching to the converted, but really Talos is kind of where all of the kind of magic happens. So Cisco Talos is one of the largest commercial threat intelligence teams in the world, comprised of an estimated 350 researchers, analysts, engineers, linguists, developers, the list goes on, all working around the clock, around, digging deep into threats, tracking bad actors, creating and shipping detection, and really kind of aiding deep and meaningful context to threat intelligence. So the teams are supported by, what is deemed to be unrivaled telemetry and sophisticated systems to effectively, accurately track threats and provide the support and the intelligence to protect all of Cisco's clients globally, all of their products and all of their services. So it really is intelligence at scale. And then onto another factor as to why Cisco really is around visibility, and, to stop more, you must see more. So protecting your network requires, huge depth and breadth of coverage, and you can only really protect where you have that visibility. So Cisco's focus on that is really quite exceptional, and the breadth and the depth of the Cisco portfolio, as we've just seen, really enables unmatched visibility across the threat landscape. And the last point in there is really around a bit more kind of common sense. By leveraging an existing Cisco investment, and most organizations out there that we have come across have invested in Cisco to a certain extent, whether that be Cisco firewalls or firepower, or whether that be using Cisco Duo or Umbrella. So by leveraging the existing investment that you've made, you will be making substantial gains in improving the overall kind of posture, security posture of your network, and obviously your kind of infrastructure. So we think those are pretty compelling reasons why to choose Cisco as your security provider as an approach. And then just kind of moving on to the last slide, which really is just a bit of an RXLine again. We are a Cisco Premier Partner, and we've got a fantastic proven track record of success for delivering secured critical infrastructure services all the way through from concept through to design, implementation, managed execution and delivery, and obviously then everything underpinned by what is a very effective world-class managed service. So that's it, guys and girls. Thank you very much for joining the webinar. Our contact details are below. There's more information on our website. I trust you found the webinar informative. For any questions, please do get in touch with us. We're on social media, we're online, and hopefully that you took some value away from that. So thank you once again for your time. Thank you, Mark, for joining me on the webinar, and thank you very much. Goodbye.